Hi there, everyone, and welcome to the Athlete C.A.F.E.
Hi guys, I'm Carly, former collegiate lacrosse player.
I'm Abby, former gymnast and collegiate dancer.
I'm Frances, former collegiate track athlete.
And I'm Emily, former collegiate volleyball player. Let's get into today's topics and see what's on the menu.
Large cappuccino. Orders up.
Welcome back.
Hey.
Yeah.
I'm so excited kind of be doing this. I feel like the last time we did it was like the big to-do, and now we're back again, and it's like I'm excited to kind of get more of a routine with it.
I know.
Yeah, we got our first guest, too.
I know.
Just so voluntary or not, I'm not really sure.
We have a guest doggo with us today. I'm sure if you're watching our video, you'll be able to see him, providing the calm vibes here today.
Sorry in advance if you hear the snoring.
Yeah,
Yeah, he's kind of pinned me down.
Frances might also fall asleep by this just from the snuggles.
But we're very excited. So I think today we want to really get into, honestly, like we were talking earlier this week, trying to figure out where to just go next after our first couple episodes aired. We have a ton of topics to go through. So it's like exciting because we know that this isn't going to go anywhere anytime soon. But what is the next thing we want to get to? And so I feel like recently we've had a lot of kids, not a lot of our kids, but it's a common theme of just like athlete identity. And we feel like it's a very important piece to touch on. And we kind of want to do it earlier on in these episodes to make sure that it's in here and people have a place to go to. It's not like you're waiting for it. So I think we really want to go through that today as our topic, and just shed some light on different aspects of athlete identity, and hopefully whoever is listening can kind of just gain some different perspective and just kind of hopefully feel a little bit more like you're not alone in maybe just that feeling that you have of whatever that identity is wherever you're at in your life of your sport. So let's get into it. I know, Frances, when we were going through this, you kind of started off with this idea of just like the timeline of your athletic identity and what that means. So why don't you kind of touch on that a little bit?
Yeah,
Start off with that.
I think it's hard for a lot of athletes to think about, but at some point, whether it's high school, college, professional, at some point, like you hang up the jersey. Yeah. And at some point, whether it's in your control and you know when your last meet, your last competition is, or if it's a career-ending injury, like
Or COVID hits and you don't get your seat.
right,
It's the worst thing ever.
and like I think that's a hard thing for a lot of athletes to face. Is you spend so many weeks, hours, years like training as an athlete, and then it ends. And then it's, what do I do now, right? And so I think that's something that a lot of athletes struggle with, but that's like something every athlete gets to, right?
And I think like coaches and like parents and whoever it is don't know how to prepare you for that. Like you spend so much time talking about this is all the training you have to do for your sport and for your success, but then you don't really get that same training to, know how to exit your sport.
Right.
And a lot of times I feel like people don't think about it until you're at that tail end.
Yeah.
Unless, like you said, you do get an injury that comes out of nowhere. But a lot of times, like, you get so caught up in that current state that you're in. When I was 13, 14, 15 years old, like, that was my whole world. I wasn't thinking about
volleyball was going to go on forever.
6 years later when I was going to possibly be done at the end of college. Like, I just wasn't even thinking about that. And again, like, we're not trying to be Debbie Downers over here about like forcing you to think about it, but it is such an important fact that people don't bring up enough of like preparing for that ahead of time. Like we talked about being proactive with our confidence. Like you also have to be proactive with the way that you're viewing your identity and how that is affecting you, because it's great that you're doing so well in your sport. And it's great that it's like you're continuing down the path year after year, but there's a lot of truth to be said about when you do hang up that jersey for whatever reason. And it's hard.
Yeah.
It's really hard.
It's really, really hard.
I think one of the best places to start when you're kind of figuring out who you are, and something that I think Frances does too, like we always ask in the first session to our clients or our athletes, like, who are you? Who's Emily Marcinowski? And don't say anything about being an
sports.
athlete. Like,
Right.
tell me everything you think I should know, your interests, your passions, your, family life, your friend life, your just anything you can think of without saying anything about
And
like
they
playing.
all
And they all
blank
blank.
stare.
It's
Yep.
like, wait, that's hard. I'm like,
Yeah.
yeah, I know. So
Like, that's
let's think
why I'm
about
making you do
right?
it.
Right? Let's think about it. Let's dive in. And sometimes, like that I've seen is like they'll say like I'm in 8th grade, and I don't know. They say very like minimal or
Basic.
simple, basic things, and then I'm like, okay, like what about your school life? What about your home life? Right? And so I like pull it out, and they're like, oh. So I think it's also just thinking about like the other aspects of life that are so normalized and so day to day that you don't really think about, but are just as important as your athlete identity. So
Yeah.
And I think there's a piece of that too of like, I kind of think of it as like a balance scale, but like, yes, your athlete identity might be a little more important in your mind. And just because like you play an instrument or you have this great artistic ability, it may not be as important in your life, but you still have to give it credit.
Yeah.
And you still have to really lean into that if it is something that you enjoy doing. And I think oftentimes we just get, again, your schedule. It's like the athletic part might take up more of your time.
Right.
And that's,
For sure.
that's great. But it's like, how can we, as your mental performance coaches, encourage you to really lean into those other areas?
Yeah, like what other roles do you have to fulfill during the week, or do you get to fulfill
Right.
throughout the week, and making sure that the successes that you are gaining there feel just as good as and important as successes in your athletics.
And it can be as simple as like, I'm a brother, I'm a sister,
Yeah.
I'm a daughter, I'm a son. And I'm like, yes, it feels
Those are
so
all
normalized.
roles.
You're at home all the time. You're
Right, it's just part
yelling
of
at your little sister, like all
Okay.
those things. But, tapping into those things when you have to hang out up the jersey, right? Like you have to remember those things and pour energy into those things. Maybe not as much, right? When you're in season, some things kind of fall behind, but still reminding yourself, like, I have all these other amazing things in my life and all these other roles in my life and hats that I wear. So.
Right.
Right. I think of my one client. I just met with her this week. She's a volleyball player, and she her one travel season was ending, and she was like, I just went and I made this ensemble team for my high school next year. And we talked for like 30, 40 minutes about it. And she was so exciting, and she was trying out for another piece. And that singing piece is just so important for her in life. And she's like, I've come to find that like I love volleyball, and I'm hopeful to make, my high school team next year when I try out. But like, this part of me is so important, and it's been so great for me. Like before, at the beginning of my travel season, I thought, I was this really great volleyball player, and I still am, but seeing how these other parts fulfill me as well has been super important. I think she's always thought that, but it kind of seemed to like hit her more recently. I don't know.
I actually just had someone this week who, and she's younger, so I was more surprised to kind of like hear it from her. But she's like at that point where like school's wrapping up, so finals and exams are coming up, and she's getting like really stressed out with practice and school. And she like mentioned to me, she's just like, I want school to be important, and I want to put in my time there and get my grades, because I know sports will not always be there, and I want a degree to like fall back on. And I was like, that's great.
Yeah, and it's so hard sometimes.
It's hard.
And it's that kind of balance of, okay, I have a lot of homework tonight, but I have practice. Is it worth going to practice and being so stressed out at practice because I know I have to come home and do a ton of homework that then I don't feel like I'm having a good practice, and then I'm feeling like I can't get my work done? Or would it be better to not go to practice that night and stay home and work on my homework?
I feel like that's a curse word to people.
Yeah, right? But
right?
it's one of those things that like if you can't pour all of your energy into both of those identities and both of those roles, sometimes you have to pick one. And I think just as athletes, we're so ready and easily able to pick that I'm going to put my sport first, and that is the role that is most important. And all else can kind of fall to the wayside. But there's some days where you're like, yeah, I just can't go to practice tonight. And my coaches are going to have to be okay with that because school is so important for me. Or my brother's birthday party, or my little sister has a softball game I want to go to, right? It is sometimes you don't want to put that athlete as the same thing. Maybe it's your role as a sister needs to be your main identity for that day. And it's hard. It's really, really hard. But knowing that those are all important to you,
Yes.
and that each one is going to have its time and place makes it a little bit easier to make that hard call.
The other piece of that I know we always talk about is the athletes that play multi-sports, right? And that's
Yes.
usually in the middle school
yeah.
high school
yes.
realm of like,
Yes.
oh my God, I want to be the best gymnast. I want to be the best lacrosse player. I want to be the best, it's like, that is impossible. You can't
Yes.
do it all, right? Like, and I think it gets to a point that is hard and kind of goes back to the identity of like, where, like, which one's most important? Like, you
Right.
gotta choose one. Like, if you want to go to college or you want to kind of like pour your energy into one, you gotta choose one, right?
Right.
Can't do it all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When I talk, I think of a client that I have, and she plays a great softball player and a great volleyball player, and she is trying to be the best at both. And I'm like, it is, I hate to say this, but like, you're in volleyball season. You got to give more time to volleyball. Softball
That is your identity.
that is your
right
identity
now.
right now. You can do softball when you have the free time, but I literally pulled out a 24-hour like pie chart with her, and we colored in all of the hours where she had things to do, and there was literally 3 hours in her day of
Yeah.
free time. And I'm like, softball just is not going to be there for you right now. And I'm sitting here with you, and that's really hard, but you've got to take those in stride. And in the summer, softball will be
Right.
your main thing, and
How did she
it'll
handle that?
shift.
'Cause
I don't think
that's a
she
harsh
liked
reality.
it.
Yeah, I wouldn't
And
have liked it.
it was
I
hard
still
for-
wouldn't have.
I wouldn't have liked it either. And it's hard for, honestly, me as a mental performance coach to say that. But there's a big piece of like, there's a lot of pressure that I felt like playing multiple sports, you have to like be so good at all of it, to get the play time, to feel like you're getting better. And I don't know. It's hard to know if that's really achievable at all times. It's really tough.
Something falls behind.
Right.
It just has to. And I think like we've seen too with the perfectionists, like the
Yes.
people that
Yes.
identify or have
yeah.
perfectionistic tendencies, like, oh my gosh, that is like just, it's a failure
is-
to them.
yes.
They
Yes.
can't be the best at everything that they do.
Right.
School, 3 sports, being a human,
Yeah.
right? Like,
Yeah.
Being a good
something
friend.
falls behind eventually.
Yeah.
So
And I think it's also interesting, like, with that, like, even if you're not the absolute best athlete, you don't, make it to the pros, you don't make it to college, or, you don't make it to the level that you set for yourself, you're still an athlete.
Yes.
Right?
Right.
You don't have to be the best to be an athlete. And I mean, I
Right.
know you said it in maybe one of our very first episodes of, we still all identify as athletes.
Yeah.
Oh,
Not
yeah,
a
I will
single, I
forever.
mean, Francis a little bit is still running. More Emily
Yeah.
still plays
Yeah.
volleyball and like whatever.
would.
I will.
I would.
I was gonna say I still will try a backflip every once in a while, and there's gonna come a day when I can't do it anymore, and then
Right.
we might have to have a session for me to get through that.
counseling
But
session.
But it's still not even that you can't do it anymore. Like, that's just your body, but
Yeah.
you still identify that way.
exactly,
Yeah.
so it's like we are all still athletes, even though we've technically hung up the jersey.
If you like what you're listening to, be sure to follow the Athlete C.A.F.E on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube. You can find us wherever you enjoy listening to your podcasts. Hope you enjoy the rest of the episode. But I think even going into that though, like, there's a big piece of that perfectionism that you're speaking on, and just this, you will always consider yourself an athlete, right? But like, that to me draws right into this idea of our self-esteem.
Yes.
And how we view ourselves. So self-esteem is this idea of what, like, do you love yourself? How do you view yourself from an outside perspective, which is really, really crucial when you're growing up and 13, 14, kind of right in that 7th, 8th grade,
Absolutely.
high school phase, like you're trying to show off to everybody. You're trying to be the cool kid. You're trying to make these friends. Like, you're going from 8th grade to high school.
Social approval. Yeah.
Right. But there's a big piece of that of like finding these separate roles in your life, because if you're sitting there at the end of a game and you didn't perform maybe as well as you wanted to, or you lost, and you sit there and say, I feel like a bad person because I didn't play well. That is
Like your entire identity is now like just on that game that you had.
tied to
and
your performance.
Yeah. And if you had a bad performance, then it's devastating, right?
Yeah, it could be, but that doesn't mean that you're a bad person
Right.
because you had a bad performance. And I'm honestly, like, I probably felt that way at some points. Like, it made me sad, but it made me feel lesser of myself because I wasn't performing maybe for the people that I wanted to, or for myself. And I'm putting all this time in and I didn't perform well. And so I think really just being able to understand how that self-esteem and how you feel about yourself is, like, you become aware of that,
Yeah.
it's going to really be able to help you. And then you can, if you have like a poor performance or you're not as happy with yourself, like, you can lean into those other areas that you have to kind of help balance it too.
Yeah.
So I think self-esteem to me is so important when thinking about your identity, because at the end of the day, if you don't love who you are and you don't have this, I mean, it's an ebb and flow. It's like an up and down thing, right? Like, everyone has stuff about themselves that they don't truly love, and you got to get kind of surrounded with that. But I mean, being able to separate that performance piece from who you see yourself as can be super crucial depending on how it impacts your self-esteem.
What are your thoughts on all of you, on your thoughts on this? Like, I feel like I've seen a bigger increase in the lack of being able to separate your athlete identity with like other identities with athletes who their parents coach them, because it bleeds into the different, you know, and I think from a personal perspective, like, I think I felt definitely when my dad was my coach, like, my self-worth or my self-esteem was definitely influenced by how my dad had felt like I did.
Yeah.
And I felt like, you know, if he was proud of me, I was proud of myself, right? If he was yelling at me or wanted me to do better, like, I was not happy with myself. And also ebb and flows with my success in lacrosse. But I think like a lot of the athletes I work with, I've had so many people say, like, I just wish they were my coach at, you know, the sport, at baseball, at lacrosse, but then my dad at home, and like really set that boundary, because it's hard to have the boundaries, you know, crossed, right?
Yeah,
or, you know, blended.
Yeah, it's tough. And I've seen it go a lot of different ways. I recently was working with a baseball player, and dad was his coach. And I will never, like, in our intro call and like our first time meeting, the dad said, you know, Abby, if you come back to me and tell me that me being my son's coach is the root of his problems and is causing him more stress, please tell me and I will step back.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh my gosh, like, that is such a unique and almost novel kind of idea that I've heard from a parent. But like, I think part of it was that athlete was able to say to his dad, like, I need a dad right now. I don't need my coach. And there was other times where he said, I need my coach and not my dad. Like, there were some times where he's like, I need a little bit of tough love. And he kind of learned to ask for that. So he knew when to say, my role right now as an athlete, my dad's role right now as a coach. And that is the identities I need to lean on to. And then he's like, there was other days where I just didn't play well and I was feeling really bad about myself. And so I just needed my dad to tell me I was going to be okay, and that he still loved me and he wasn't mad at me because I didn't play well that day. And so they did such a good job of it that they knew what identity was going to serve them best in that. So I think, you know, athletes, if you're in that situation, or parents, if you're the parent and the coach, like, have that conversation.
It's all about communicating.
When you get off the field, you're in the car, which we will get into that car ride home from a game, from a practice
Can be a lot.
very touchy sometimes. You got to be a little bit careful of how you play your cards with that sometimes. But, you know, have that conversation of, okay, before we start any conversation about your sport, let's be really specific. Are we coach athlete? Or are we parent child right now? And so that is, and it might feel a little silly at first to be like, okay, what identity are we going to do right now? But it's really, really important. And, you know, it can just make it something that you can actually do to fix some of those issues of that.
Yeah, because I will say, like, I feel like we've all had a lot of parent coach athlete
Yeah.
type relationships.
That's interesting.
And
I
I'm
don't know
wondering
I
if
thought of
it's,
that.
I think it's just a younger athlete type of thing with parents. No?
I don't think so.
No?
I think
Like, I have a few in mind that high school, for sure.
High school,
obviously, not
okay.
college, but
Yeah.
like, and on the flip side of that, you know, one athlete in particular that I'm thinking about is the dad has been the coach at the school for 10 years. And he came in, you know, he obviously goes to the same school that he coaches at or teaches at. And like, the athlete was like, I would never ask my dad to
step
leave,
down.
step away, you know. So
Right.
there's obviously depends on the situation, of
For
course,
sure.
but at the younger level, they choose most of the time,
right.
you know. And then at the high school level, it's kind of
Yeah,
like a
it's more of
career,
what I'm getting
right?
at, right? But I think, like, the parents and kids that I've worked with, that I've had, I feel like there's a like unspoken understanding of what that relationship should look like, and there is no active communication about it. And I think that, to me, is, I try and communicate that with a lot of my parents in that situation of just like, talk about it, like, say what you need, and like, I'm not yelling at you at practice because I'm mad at you for something you did for not cleaning the dishes at home.
Right.
Like, I'm not taking it out on you. This is me just being coach and not mom or dad.
Yeah.
So I think it's just, any parents listening, and if you're in this boat, like, just communicate and kind of be very outspoken about that, because it makes a world of difference.
Which we will definitely dive into in another podcast. The best ways to communicate.
Yes,
It's our favorite topic.
We love communication. But yeah, so I think bringing that all together of just that communication piece, understanding how that the way that you're communicating is building that self-esteem. But then again, going back to just what I was saying about self-esteem and being able to have that be influencing or understanding just those different roles and what you need from your different roles. Maybe you did have a bad game and you need to go chime into your art stuff and to kind of help you feel a little bit better and decompress or...
Yeah. And I think that is another conversation I often have with athletes is they start to understand that they have multiple identities and they have multiple roles, but the people around them really hone in on the fact that they're an athlete. I mean, I remember so distinctly, I would get to all these family parties and I had a very close family growing up, and it was like every Sunday we ended up at somebody's house, watching football or whatever it was. And the only question I would get was, how's gymnastics? How'd you compete yesterday?
Right.
How's training going? How's your injury? How are you healing? Right. It was right. And it was, and I think it actually got a little bit more difficult when I was injured. And so, and I've talked with a couple of athletes about this, like, especially when I had a cast on and when I was on crutches, and that was such a physical reminder of, my identity at that point was an injured athlete. Yeah. Or I was injured, and that was what I was known for. So that's what people asked me about.
Yeah.
Right.
And it was hard because at that point I was getting accepted to my top choice college. I was starting to dance again. I had just, kind of found some new passions in my life. And those were the things that I wanted to talk about. And I was like, I don't want to be reminded of the fact that I'm not a gymnast anymore or that I'm injured, right? And it's hard because especially on those days where you feel like you didn't perform well, and then everybody's asking you about it, and you have to then tell them, oh yeah, we lost, I didn't play well.
Right.
Right. That's when it starts to get tied into your self-esteem a little bit. So a conversation that I have with some of my athletes, and I wish somebody had told me too, is you're allowed to direct that conversation a different way. You are allowed to be a little forward in teaching other people that you have other identities. Right. So, for example, I was working with an athlete recently who's coming out of an injury and kind of almost transitioning back into her sport, but it's everybody's like, how's it healing? How are you progressing? And all of this stuff. And it kind of became like the only topic her and her parents would talk about because it was so prevalent in their life. But she was like, but Abby, like, I also like got my chemistry grade up like significantly. And she's like, I want that to be talked about. And so we talked about it, and I'm like, you can answer their question when they're saying, how's your injury? And you can be like, oh, it's great. And also, guess what? Like, I got my chemistry grade up. Or guess what? I also have my school dance this weekend, and I'm really excited. Do you want to see a picture of my dress? Right? Like, it can be something as simple as, you don't have to be mean and say, listen, I need you to like acknowledge my other identities. I need you to not ask me about that. You can politely say, hey, here's your answer, but also here's something else exciting about me. And then that opens the conversation with these people to say, like, oh my gosh, I didn't know you were, working with a tutor. That's really awesome. Or, you say, I ran really well, but also I just finished this art piece that I'm really excited about.
My gosh.
And then they can be like, oh my gosh, I didn't know you were an artist.
I can't tell you like how many times so many people like on my team in my life, like in college, didn't know that I was an art student like the first 2 years of college. And like I would be like, oh yeah, like I just came from the studio. Like I was working in there for like 6 or 7 hours. They're like, what?
Yeah.
I was like, yeah, I do have other things outside. Right.
So I think like you're allowed to answer their question and, give them that answer because it is a part of you, right? You don't want to totally take it away and just say like, oh yeah, like we didn't have the best game as a team, like, but we learned a couple of good lessons from it. But like, also, like, we're going on this family trip later this week, and I'm really excited about it. And, let's talk about that.
And I think, oh, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, just using, like, the direct communication of, like, I actually don't want to talk about that. Like, thank you for checking in, but I'm struggling. It's kind of a trigger for me right now. Like, I just don't want to communicate about my athletic career right now.
Yes.
It's hard.
You can set that boundary.
Yeah, set the boundary.
I think, too, though, it's important to... I feel like a lot of kids, and I even struggle with this, of being so forward about things that people aren't asking about. So it kind of goes to that confidence a little bit, and that we talked about cocky versus confident and stuff. And so sometimes I feel like a lot of my kids are like, well, if no one's asking about it, like, why would I bring it up? Like, they don't care. Like, why do I want to talk about it? talk about it.
Yeah.
Bring it up. Like, that's something that you should be proud of if you did come from your art studio. Be like, guys, look what I just did. Like, it's
Right.
not cocky. It's you showing off what you're proud of.
Your other identities.
And your other
Yeah.
identities, right? Just because people aren't asking about it, like, you can still come forward and speak those different identities.
And there's a difference between people not asking about it because they don't care, they don't want to know, like, versus they just don't know what other identities
Yeah, right.
you
It's they
have,
just might
right?
not
Like,
know, right?
Because how many times did you talk about your art, you know?
Not too much, no one.
Yeah.
I mean, like it was weird because I would go to this art studio and there I was an art student,
Right.
and nobody there knew that I was an athlete. And then I would go to practice and it's like I'm an athlete there, but no one knows like that I was an art student too. And
So
it's
separate.
yeah.
And I think sometimes, like, going along with that, like, you're allowed to ask them to be like, hey, do you want to see this, cool thing that I just did? Or like, hey, coach, like, I might have to be a couple minutes late tomorrow, and like, that's just going to have to be what it is. But hey, look at what I'm working on. Like, isn't this cool?
Yeah.
Like, you're allowed to, especially even with coaches too, be like,
Yeah.
this is who I am. And it also helps them know how to coach you better. If
Yeah.
your coaches know who you are other than an athlete, it helps them coach you better, and it also can help you know how to be better coached and how to, the lessons that you learn in the other areas of your life. If you play an instrument, like, that is a lot of self-discipline you have to have. You have to practice. You have to have the posture. You have to, have all of this intricate, fine motor detail and motor skills that is going to translate to other parts of your like sport. And it's
And just
like
the performance aspect.
Yeah.
Like, I was
Yeah.
talking with that client who made the ensemble. I was like, how the heck do you get up there and sing? I was
Right.
like, that
Could
is
not be me.
wild to me.
Could not be
Like,
me.
That seems so much more stressful than going out and playing a volleyball game. But
Going back to the coaching thing, something that one of my athletes told me that I thought was genius and very interesting when it comes to identity is when she was going through the college like recruiting process, she made sure her number one thing was, does the coach have a family? Like, are they family oriented? Because that shows her that they have other identities other than just being a coach,
Right.
and that they understand that the athletes also have other identities, which is so important, and like
really cool.
something that like I recommend to a lot of people going through the process, if that's important to you, right? I think looking into that and asking those questions when you're talking to coaches in the recruiting process, like, do you have and they don't have to have a family per se, but like, do you spend time outside of just basketball or just lacrosse? Like, I think that's so important because they have that deeper understanding of what it's fine to miss for, an art, I don't even know, an art
show.
Art show.
An art show, yeah.
An art show or orchestra concert, like, that's fine. And some coaches are like, that is not okay at all, right?
Right.
So
Yeah. And I think that's one of those things where, like, talk to your parents, because I'm sure your parents will back you up on that. Right. And if they don't, find someone else in your life that's going to back you up on it, because it's so important. And I was just working with an athlete, or maybe Tuesday, I don't remember, but she is a very serious, very talented softball athlete. And she got on our call and was like, hey, like, I don't have great service, so I'm sorry if like it's a little glitchy, but like, I'm at my brother's baseball game. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's awesome. She's like, yeah, it's the only baseball game I'm going to get to all season because, I'm so busy with my schedule. And I asked her, I said, do you need to be an athlete working on her mental performance right now? Or do you need to be a sister going to watch your little brother's baseball game? And she, it was a hard, like, I kind of had to get it out of her. And she's like, I think I want to go watch my brother's game. And I'm like, go watch your brother's baseball game. Do not feel bad about it. And she felt a little guilty, I could tell, when like, she was like, well, I was supposed to meet and now I'm going to cancel. And I was like, but this is what's important. This is what's going to, you are not at practice right now. You should go be a sister right now. That is the role that you need to fill. And it's important, from our perspective too, is when they come to us for that, we also make sure that we're reinforcing with them that, yes, you need to go be a sister right now. And like, we're on your side, that's the role you need to fill.
right. And I think we kind of make it sound a little easy. Like, I know not everybody can just miss practice if you're not feeling it, or if you're stressed with school or whatnot. Like, we get that. We've all been there. So I think there's a reality to it, but just hopefully in listening to this, you guys can get just a perspective of like, okay, maybe I can, or like what really is the priority here? How can I talk to mom and dad about, okay,
How can I communicate it?
how can I communicate it a little differently? Maybe I'm not going to get to miss practice, but maybe I can show up late. Maybe mom and dad will help me figure out, okay, how can I find my homework time? How can I manage my time better? Like, use your resources. You may not always get that easy out of practice or whatever, but how can you speak what you need and be able to lean into those other identities to feel supported
and try to balance so you're not becoming burnout or, you know, just putting all your eggs in one basket.
It's a great way to explain that.
Right.
Yeah.
No, I feel like we went through a lot of good stuff, and I think it's interesting too, just how we have all had different, we as in the four of us here on the podcast have had different endings to our careers.
Yeah, four very different endings,
different,
actually.
I think. Me and you are probably similar.
I
we're probably similar, but
probably, yeah.
Me probably being the more normal and just ending it at college, but I felt like I was very ready to be done. Like when I was excited to be a NARP, as we say. I don't know if anyone's ever heard this, but it's a NARP stands for non-athletic regular person. So I was very excited for that because volleyball was a fall sport. So I got my spring semester off with nothing to do. I got my one regular semester in college and I was stoked. So we'll talk about that a little bit later. But I mean, Francis, for you, how did it?
I mean, I feel like, after college, I ended it. And I feel like my body was ready to be done with the sport. Like at my senior year, I was just mentally, physically burned out with everything. But it was really hard, like after I graduated, like talking to people at home and talking to other people. And it's like, I'm not an athlete. Like I'm not competing anymore.
You kind of get that. So what now?
Yeah.
What are you going to do now?
And then it's like that whole summer I was like, where do I go in life now? Like I'm not starting in the fall with practice and school, and so it's like, oh my gosh, like yeah. And so I think it was like more like my body wanted it to end, but like it was confusing to like lean into my other identities that I had. So
I hadn't put that time towards it. And I also think too, there's a piece to that of like, what do I do now? Because like I didn't know how to work out on my own. I didn't know, like, yes, I had school to go to, but there's so many pieces of that where I like wish I would have thought about it ahead of time. And part of me was like, I'm taking like 2 years off of working out, like I've done, but like that's not how everyone is. And so I think even just that piece of it, like I wish I would have leaned into my other identities and thought about it earlier, so that way I could have had a better preparation exiting that piece.
Yeah. And something that one of my coaches in college kind of told me like towards the end of senior year, and he wasn't my coach, he was coaching for one of the other events, but he likes to emphasize like with his group that you're a student -athlete. And so student comes first, because when you hang up the jersey, you have that degree to lean on, right? Like those trophies just collect dust on the shelves, but like that degree you can use. So what do you want to do? The hyphen stood for everything in between, all of your other roles, all of your like mental health. And so you have to kind of take care of that student and that hyphen before you can be an athlete.
I just got chills like hearing that, actually.
That's great.
I've never heard of it.
I really like that. I feel like that could be, you know, a whole nother topic we dive into and can kind of break that down a little bit more. I think that could be such a valuable conversation too.
Yeah. But I think so. And you guys had very
different endings.
Yeah.
I'm not over mine yet.
Carly's still mourning.
So yeah, obviously mine was graduated in 2020 and started lacrosse season. Like the season started in January, February of 2020, and then COVID hit and shut down the whole universe.
Literally
in March. So that was traumatic to say the least. And I think like one of the worst parts was our school said like, and not to blame them because no one knew what was happening, but our school was like, hey, just go home for 2 weeks and you guys will be back. So we felt, you know, like we're going to come back. Like, yes, this sucks. We're going to be off for 2 weeks of our sport, but we're going to come back and finish our senior season. And, you know, being a captain, you know, it was the first season I was starting fully. Like I felt like everything that I had put my work towards was finally falling into place, and then it was just ripped from under you. So yeah, and that was going back to the identity. I had no clue who I was. No clue.
Yeah.
And luckily the world was shut down for a very long time that I could kind of mourn, kind of figure it out. And definitely it's been a transition, but like at least it wasn't like just ripped from an injury standpoint, obviously, which you'll get to. And then you have to kind of, the life and the world still continues and you are kind of paused. So
Yeah, that's a really interesting way. Like, it was hard because, you know, when I was going through my surgery, and it was kind of a lead up to my big injury, you know, I had had a little bit of pain and then I just kind of ignored it. Then it got a little bit worse and then I ignored it. And then I started feeling pain in a whole other part of my foot that I was like, that doesn't make sense for where I think my injury is. So I really ignored that. And then I kind of had my big crescendo moment where I had the big dramatic fall. It was kind of a mess. And it's interesting to think back, you know, I can replay that in my head. I know exactly where I was. I know exactly what the surroundings looked like. You know, I can replay it so clearly in my head. And I remember I was sitting there and it's so funny. And my mom remembers this and we joke about it all the time. The first thing I said when I had medical around me is, don't tell my mom, she's going to be so mad at me.
Oh my God.
Because I thought my identity was as an athlete and I had failed and I had disappointed my parents. And I think she would, sorry, Mom, because I know you're going to listen to this and you're probably going to cry. But like, that was my biggest concern was like, I just let down my mom, my coaches, my teammates, like, and I was in a lot of pain. But that wasn't my main concern. And so I was in immediate denial that I was hurt. And I was like, I still have more to do. I still have to compete more. Like, I need to get going. And they were like, no, like you can't even walk right now. Like you're not performing anymore. And so I was it was interesting. So that was like the end of in sports for me for a little bit. And I saw so many other people still getting to perform and compete. And that was hard. So I just transitioned to, well, now I'm going to dive into my recovery. So I kind of extended my part of my, you know, athletic career because I was like, I'm going to heal and I'm going to get better. And then it was just that, you know, what's worth doing again, what's not. And then I was very fortunate that I was able to come back and dance pretty normally in college, and then, you know, had to leave. And, you know, I had a lot of things going on, you know, in my personal life when I was dancing and leaving dance, but it all kind of stemmed, like, if my injury hadn't happened, like my sports career would have ended completely differently. And it's hard to kind of come to terms with like, what could I have done? Yeah. What could I have been? And I remember I didn't have a coach. I had a coach when I was coming out of retirement from gymnastics where I was just doing some basics. I was really trying to get back into it. And I know she meant it as such a compliment. But I was just working handstands on beam, just kind of getting used to being up that high again. She goes, wow, you could have been really, really good. And I know that she meant it as such a compliment. Right. It crushed me because I was like, you're right. I could have been. And then I remember so distinctly this same coach, she's a wonderful human, but it was my last meet, my senior year, and I ended on vault, which was my strongest event. It's where I ended up being state champion. But you get 2 vaults. So you vault once, and then you get to decide if you want to do a second one. And so I decided, you know, my first one was good. I think I can do it a little bit better. And she came down to the end of the runway, and she said, are you ready for your last piece of competitive gymnastics ever?
Oh, my gosh.
And I said, no. and it just was one of those moments where, like, it hit me in the face. I was like, I'm done. I'm done now. And it could have gone a lot differently had I not got injured. But, you know, like we said last time, there's a lot of things that were put into motion for me because of my injury that I don't think I would have gotten. So it's taken a long time to come to terms that my injury could have been the best thing to happen to me, because it did not feel like it at the time when I was trying to deal with that identity crisis a little bit.
Yeah, no, perspective and awareness. And I think it's just interesting how it, you know, leads us all to be where we are. I think we say that all the time, you know, just even in this career set, like the steps that happened in order to get us where we are. And one of those, everything happens for reasons.
I don't know if I would have wanted to hear that when I was going through it all, but here I
am. 2020.
For sure. Well, awesome. Well, good. Well, hopefully, I think the biggest takeaways from this, hopefully for anyone listening, is just communication is key. communication with family, with coaches, with anybody, understanding what, like, I hope you guys think about what your roles are. Like, take a second and like debrief with yourself.
Write 'em
of, like,
down.
write them down. What else do I do? What else is important to me? And really lean into those. Maybe try that out this week. And then also, like, where is my self-esteem? Like, how do I identify that way? Just kind of build some awareness, because you're doing a lot of stuff and you're amazing for what you do. And it's just
Absolutely.
kind of giving some credit to that, even on the tough days. So anything else?
No, I think that's good.
Awesome. Well, we will see you guys next time. Okay.
Bye.
All right, see ya.
If you like what you're listening to, be sure to follow the Athlete Cafe on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube. You can find us wherever you enjoy listening to your podcasts.